Hey, today in the Woodworking Garage, the tools have gone silent for this special edition episode where we're talking with Keta Kosman of the Madison Lumber Reporter. She's an industry expert. She's going to be discussing what's currently happening in the lumber industry, and she's going to give her prediction of where prices are headed. This is an episode you're not going to want to miss, so stick around. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being here today. Hey, we're talking with Keta Kosman from the Madison Lumber Reporter. And Keta, if you would, I'd like for you to just start with telling us a little bit about what is the Madison Lumber Reporter, who are you, so people know.
Okay, so Madison's is a price guide. It's a newsletter that goes out to industry. It's been published every Friday since 1952. It used to go by mail, and then it went as a PDF by email, and now we have an online dashboard. It's very fancy. You can do a lot of things like filtering and sorting, and we don't just print the prices of the lumber. It's sawmill producer and wholesaler prices, so FOB sawmill prices. We also provide a market commentary to tell you why those prices are changing. What happens is I have an analyst who does a market survey every Thursday, calls around to all the sawmill, like the sawmills for the various products, right? Across North America, Canada, US, East, West, and South, to find out what their sales price is. And then we call the resellers, the wholesalers, and find out what they're buying for. We get a very good idea of the market every week. Quite a few of our subscribers are sawmills, and they are not shy about letting us know if we may have got a price not quite correct. And it doesn't happen very often. So there's a couple of newsletters that do this. There used to be like 5, and just as the situation changed over, especially since 2000, and both the lumber industry and the US housing industry. So we all do a market survey on Thursday, and we print on Friday. It's like the prices that the industry uses next week to have their negotiations for what they're going to book their sales orders for. Got it. Understand. So you're the who's who of the lumber industry. You're the person to know. I mean, you're the person everyone kind of looks to kind of see what's going on with, everything from supply and pricing. So you talked a little bit about, who you're reporting for and who's soaking up all this information you're providing. And I'd like to say that we're probably one level below that even, because a lot of the viewers on this channel are the end users. We're the DIYers going out to the retail center, buying wood for projects at home, renovations at home. We have, cabinet makers and furniture makers and people at that level who are actually consumers of this product. And so they're the ones that are like right now saying, what the heck is going on with the lumber industry? So can you give us a better sense of, from the tree, who's involved, from the tree getting cut down by the logger, before that piece of wood shows up at our lumber center when we get it, go into the store to buy it? Who's involved in the process? Okay, so I just want to make sure they're clear, the difference between hardwood and softwood. So people who do like millwork and moldings and trim and things like that, a lot of that might be hardwood. So we don't track that. That is very regional. Good point. Right. The hardwoods, you can get them all across the continent, but generally speaking, they're sold within the region that they're made, right? So if you're getting red oak or you're in New York State, you're going to get red oak from New York State or from Quebec or something like that, right? Right. So that's the first thing. And then for softwood, the largest demand by far for North America is US housing. Mm-hmm. And the supply is, there is a little bit more production of softwood in America than there is in Canada. Really? And yeah, there's slightly more, a little bit more production. But even with that, the US does not produce enough lumber to serve its own needs. Right. And Canada
everything in Canada is 10%. 10% of as many people, 10% of GDP, 10% of everything. So Canada produces way more lumber than we have people.
Right.
So Canada has to export and the US has to import.
Right.
Even when housing is down, even when housing is really low, it's still not enough production in the US. Over the years with the softwood lumber duty, Canada found customer overseas. And in the past, through history until 2000 or early 2000s, 85% of Canadian lumber went to the US. Now it's about 65%.
No.
10% stable goes into Canada, stays in Canada, and about 6% goes to Japan. The volumes to Japan are premium, #1 appearance grade, not #2 and better. The prices that that I talk about are standard grade. So the price of lumber and the supply of lumber really relies on what's happening with US housing. Okay. In the supply chain, like what you're asking, from log to sawmill to wholesaler to retailer, the cost method across North America is quite different. In Canada, the forest is owned by the public, managed by the government. The timber prices are set provincially. So British Columbia has its system and Quebec has its system. In the US, there is not a lot of timber sourced from federal park land. It's almost all, essentially all private timberland.
Right.
So there's a different mechanism there. And like I was saying, a huge proportion of Canadian lumber comes from BC. BC has been impacted by the mountain pine beetle. The timber supply is decreasing. So when you hear about the sawmills, those super mills, they call them, the large companies built modern, very high production sawmills in the early 2000s, pretty much came online just in time for the US housing crash of 2006. Right. So never really even, and the mills in everywhere, but in BC were built where the timber is, and that's where the pine beetle was the worst. So as the timber supply post pine beetle, because you can harvest for a few years before the tree really dries out, as that became reduced to the point of nothing, those sawmills in those central areas closed. So we've lost 13 of the expected 15 sawmill closures. As an aside, what I expect is that those mills will come back as a higher value remanufactured product. We can have a whole other video about the log supply in British Columbia. So, and then the other thing that happened was last year in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of fires. The fires in California, that's not really timber. It's brush and eucalyptus. Okay. But Washington State and Oregon, a little bit in Idaho, that was timber that was lost, which is the threat to supply also.
Right.
So
there's fires, and there's fires every year. And I kind of talked about that a little bit in one of my recent videos and pointed to that as being one of the factors that's causing prices to rise. And a lot of people came back and kind of pushed back on the idea because there's fires every year. And that is true, there is. But last year's, they were just particularly devastating to the lumber industry. So, and that's what you're saying. Yeah,
so fire is a natural part of the forest. Okay, so one of the reasons, this is what we've learned, one of the reasons why the pine beetle infestation was so bad was because we were putting out all the fires. Okay, so trees come down. Like people, I understand wanting to preserve forest land, but not everything is a 300-year-old Douglas fir or a 1,000-year-old cedar or redwood. Okay, so the southern pine belt in the US, which is mostly loblolly pine, they call it southern yellow pine, has about a 35-year rotation, and that's been accelerated by silviculture practices and all this kind of thing. Up here in Canada, in British Columbia, the lodgepole pine is 80-year.
Wow.
Okay, so about after 80 years, the tree is going to come down. It's going to come down to rot. It's going to come down to pest. It's going to come down to age. It's going to come down to fire.
Right.
So the combination of replanting post 1950s harvest to have lodgepole pine rather than a natural forest, which is mixed species, and the policy of putting out all the forest fires made the forest weak. If you have a forest that is similar species, similar age, the pine beetle can just go through.
Yeah,
if you have a forest that's a mixed stand and there's some spruce and there's some fir and there's some larch and there's some whatever, the pine beetle will, like, it takes longer to get through and it doesn't just kill everything. Okay. So the fire is a natural part of the forest. We humans made the forest where the timber manufacturing is done weaker. Somebody put on my YouTube, oh, the sawmills started the fire so they could raise the price.
Well, you're always going to get those trolls out there that's got their, I got to be careful because the public's going to see this.
I know.
But they've got their opinions, right? And they're kind of out there just a little bit. And I'm not trying to, talk any down to anyone, but everybody's got an opinion. But those of you specifically in the industry, you know better. I mean, you know a little bit better what's going on than some of us that are simply going to the retail center paying, $8 for a 2x4 and scratching our heads trying to figure out why.
They can scientifically trace why a fire started, and a huge proportion is lightning.
Lightning, exactly.
Okay, so when they say in the summer, don't have barbecue, don't
have barbecue.
And in BC or in North, in Washington State, Oregon, and Quebec, they put in a fire ban. So in the summer when it's really hot, you cannot log. You can't bring heavy equipment into the forest because if a single spark could cause a problem. So there is a lot of effort to keep the human-caused fires down. Yeah. And it depends on the weather. So if you have dry lightning, that has nothing to do with anyone. It's not a person.
Right.
So in the lumber manufacturing areas, when there are fires, which luckily BC has escaped the last couple of years, that threatens the timber supply. You can still harvest charred trees. Usually it just burns the outside and the crown, right? It's just, you're not going to get it. It's just not as good quality, right? So the sawmill orders the logs. Investment in harvesting happens at the opposite time of the year as construction and lumber selling. So during the winter when the ground is frozen, and in spring after the rain but before the fire ban. Okay. The sawmills invest in logging. They stock up their log yard as much as they can, run that lumber, okay, and sell during the time when construction is a lot, okay? The wholesalers follow that. The resellers and the reloads. A reload is a rail yard that's getting lumber from the sawmill and holding it to sell to other wholesalers, to retailers, to home builders, right? Mm-hmm. So there's like a distribution network that goes on. People use futures. Okay, we can stay away from that for now.
Right.
The retailers, what you're asking about, like futures, they hedge. So normally the price of wood at a retail yard doesn't really change that much over the year, even though the wholesaler price, what we track, could do its normal seasonal up and down of $150.
Got
okay.
It.
So what happened last year is everybody was caught off guard. And there was no wood because, especially in Canada, there was a very strict rules. There was a lockdown for about 6 weeks that all factories were closed. The border was actually closed even for freight for over a week and a half.
Right.
And the mills were being cautious because nobody knew what to expect. Meanwhile, the entire continent was like, I need to finish my basement. I want to put in I need an office. I'm going to do this outdoor space or whatever, right?
Right.
And that didn't stop. Like that demand did not stop. So the supply was very dropped and the demand was like nonstop. And the price rose last year so quickly and so unusually that the retailers didn't have a chance to hedge. They couldn't hedge on futures. They couldn't hedge on like buying in 3 months, like I will in June order and you bring it to me in September. Let's find a price. It just kept going up and going up. So when you're in the yard and the price of plywood tripled and nobody ever saw that before, and they're like, this must be unreal.
So it sounds like part of that is because, so the retailers say they're selling a 2x4 for $3, but they're buying replacement costs, and that replacement cost is skyrocketing, and they're chasing that replacement cost as it skyrockets highward, and $5, $6, $7, $8. And so now they're trying to play catch up because they sold a bunch of inventory low, but they're having to buy a bunch of new inventory at a much higher level. So that is contributing to what we're seeing right now.
And the retailers are not the largest buyer. The home builders are the largest buyer.
Yeah.
Okay. So the retailer, and I mean, they're big, like Home Hardware, or I don't know what Lowe's or whatever you guys have in the States.
Right.
It's sizable, but each one is ordering from its contacts.
Right.
Okay. So they're calling around to the 6 mills or whatever that they usually deal with. And the home builders were already there that day and bought everything.
Else.
They don't have enough.
Because housing just exploded. I mean, it's just everybody's buying houses. Everybody, new home construction and even retail construction is going on everywhere, and they're just soaking up all the wood.
So the contractors and the home builders are now building into, like in just the past month or so, are building into their agreements. We're going to check the price of lumber every week, and it might go up. But last year, they couldn't do that.
Right.
And in 6 weeks, when they started theirs and they were getting from the retailers, and then they were losing money.
Right.
Right. Like people, the news, and they call me and they're like, who's making money on this? And I'm like, it really doesn't seem like anyone's making money on it. Okay. So if you were a sawmill, would you rather sell 10 rail cars at $1,000 or 40 rail cars at $600?
Right.
They're not really, I mean, the bottom line is improving, but this is not the way that they want it to be. They're used to like a steady increase. Everybody looks at housing starts. Everybody does their projections. Okay, we need to order logs. It's going to take 2 or 3 months for the logs to get to the mill. We got to pay for that. Then we got to make the lumber. We got to pay our electricity. We got to pay our workers, and then we got to sell it. So it's like 6 months, right? If during that 6 months, people only buy more homes, only buy more lumber to fix up their home.
And it caught everybody off guard. Yeah. And that's a great explanation. And I'm glad you brought that point up. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here just a little bit. And you touched on this, but explain this again. So a lot of people on my channel were saying, I'm getting reports that, well, the lumber yards are full of logs. The lumber yards are full of lumber. I'm seeing hundreds of train cars just full of lumber, and it's been sitting there for weeks, and there's not a lumber shortage there. So why are prices so high? It's just greed. Someone's just raising the prices, and sure, from our perspective, not understanding the industry, that's kind of what it looks like. I mean, why is there a lumber shortage when every time I go to my Lowe's or Home Depot home center and they're fully stocked with lumber? Why are we seeing the lumber mills fully stocked with logs and with boards, train cars fully stocked, but they're not moving? So it puts that idea in people's head that, this is manipulation, this is deliberate. Somebody's just trying to, make a bunch of cash and keep the prices high. So.
Yeah, I just made a video because housing starts came out on Friday.
Yeah.
Housing starts are up, but permits are up 30%. Okay, so I explained this exact thing. That wood that they see now, that wood that they saw last week, that wood that's on the railway right now is sold.
Right.
That wood is not for you.
Right.
That wood is going to where it's going. It's coming through from the sawmill to the reload, the distribution center, immediately to the customer.
Right.
So one of the things that we explain is order file. So a sawmill order file means if you call a sawmill right now and ask them for some wood, how long before it goes into production? Okay, so following Labor Day, usually Thanksgiving, an order file might be 3 days, or it might be prompt. You might be able to get prompt wood. They'll put it on right now. because it's slow time, right? At this time of year, when we're sort of, actually by now, normally the home builders, the retailers have already ordered and are receiving their wood. So normally by now,
like the season?
yeah, for their season, that's right.
Wow.
February is, yeah, normally in a year, February is when those are ordering.
Okay.
Okay. So now they would normally be loaded up and they're stopping ordering and the prices start to get soft. Usually by May, definitely by June, usually lumber prices are leveling off. So if home building is doing well, a 6-week order file is nice. That's good. So you call, you make an order, and in 6 weeks, they're going to put it on the production line. Then you got to wait for it to arrive.
Right.
Okay. So we have a 6-week order file right now. Okay. And the supply chain is such a mess. I was on the radio not that long ago, and the interviewer was kind of surprised that I said this, but the railways are not kind to the sawmills. Okay. In Canada, there's 2 railways. And if you're a lumber manufacturer, one of them comes to you. So the CP is north and the CN is south. If something sexy like oranges or Christmas trees or something is paying a premium, you will not get your rail cars. So a sawmill will have like a standing order for 40 rail cars a week, just to use a number.
Right.
For 2 weeks, they don't get any.
Right. That's huge.
Then the next week, they get 180. And if they can't fill them, they get charged demurrage for holding the rail car with nothing in it. It's, and then the border was closed. Now in the US, there's more of a highway system, so they can truck, but a truck's like 1/3 the size of a rail car.
Right.
Okay. So.
And we're short on truck drivers anyway. So, I mean, it's.
Yeah. So you need the railways. So the customer, the retailer, and the home builder has been for almost a year, like in conniption, because the wood went out and it hasn't arrived. So yeah, the rail car is just sitting there. We know that. That's not the sawmill's fault.
Right.
Right. And so there's log supply, which is fine. All through last year, everybody was able to get logs and load up their log yard. The year ended with a sawmill wants to close the year with the log yard full and the lumber yard empty, or else they have to pay tax on the product that they have sitting there. So they've invested, they've spent their money for January 3rd or whatever. Lots of supply to produce and nothing that they need to sell on hand, right? So the log supply was not a problem. The manufacturing, like you mentioned about employees, I sent you that graph of the sawmill capacity and the lumber production, just not a very happy story.
Right.
And then the railways to get the wood to these end users who needed it yesterday.
Right.
So now they're calling back to the sawmill and they're like, well, I never got my 10 rail cars, and the price just keeps going up. Like, I mean, it's not a happy situation for the producer or for the customer.
Right. Well, this is enlightening. I got to tell you, and I know for soft lumber products, the housing market is the biggest consumer, and from my perspective here, watching all these home prices rise and rise, all this new construction, I know that that's placing a huge demand on the lumber industry. And from what you're telling me here, it's, they place their orders. It's not like they're placing their orders, all at once for the year, but then they're projecting how much wood they think they're going to need. But then all of a sudden you have this explosive housing market where people are just buying homes. And so they're starting to build more homes and all of a sudden they need more wood. And I can see now where the supply and demand issue, it really comes into play. And it's harder for them to get the lumber that they need, ultimately driving up the prices for everybody.
So the other data set, and it's not easy to get, is the remodeling. And it had a huge jump last year. So yeah. I requested of the National Association of Home Builders to, until now, it comes out very infrequently, like quarterly or even annually. and it's a trend. It's not pure numbers like housing is like this many houses.
Right.
The remodeling data is like it's the index is up or down by whatever, right?
Right.
So that is almost still an unknown. But I mean, everybody has been working on their house. Right now, the thing that I think I saw it on your channel and others as well, treated wood. So for outdoor, people they're not going to buy it. Like I'm not buying it if it's $100 for one piece, right?
Right.
The cure for high prices is high prices. So when people stop buying, right? But again, like which segment is driving this? It's kind of like all segments are in demand. Meanwhile, the producers, between the reduction in the log supply and the reduction in the amount of sawmills due to the pine beetle and all these other things, is not helping.
Right.
So last year, the U.S. exported a lot of logs to China.
Yeah, I know.
A lot of southern pine logs went to China. Canada doesn't really. There's sort of like a disincentive to export logs because we want to manufacture so that we have employment. But even Canada had an increase in export of logs.
Well, our country has a habit of importing goods from other places just so we can turn around and export, what we make ourselves here or grow ourselves. It's just, it doesn't make
I mean, if you like if you have a map, right? If you draw in your head a map of the US, you have southern pine logs, which come from the US South, East, Central, and West, going off the West Coast to China. And you have spruce logs from Europe, not nearly as many, but coming in to the East Coast because Europe had a horrible issue with spruce beetle where they have to harvest those trees. Like, it's not like the pine beetle where maybe 10 or 15 years before that tree dries out. Spruce beetle, 1 or 2 years, less than 5 years. And they can't even, there's sawmills in Germany and Czech, like in the Netherlands and stuff like that. They cannot manufacture lumber fast enough. So the US is importing logs at a good discount from Europe. It's a much smaller volume than what they're exporting to China, right? So this is like the difference between Canada and US, because the log sales is private timberland.
Right.
Okay, so like Weyerhaeuser is timberland and also has sawmills.
Right.
Not all of them are like that.
Right.
And a lot of sawmills are not timberland. And in Canada, like I said, the timber is managed by the government, and then the sawmills, they might be publicly traded or might be privately owned, but they don't own the forest.
Hey, let's jump right to the question that's on everyone's mind. When are we going to see some relief? What do you think?
So the normal seasonal, okay, so U.S. housing cycle follows the macroeconomic cycle. So it's usually about every 6 quarters or 1.5 years. Home building goes up, home building goes down. The actual construction activity follows the season. So no one wants to break ground on a new house in November and be building, and nobody wants to put their house up for sale in December and move like in January, right?
Right.
So the price of lumber and the home building activity starts going, March, April, and levels off there usually by July. If there's still construction activity after July, it's not new, it's just finishing what was already started. The way that we explain it is Labor Day is the beginning of the end, and US Thanksgiving is the end of the end. Mm-hmm. So Canadian Thanksgiving is a month before US Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. By Labor Day, the large retailers, the large home builders, they're not ordering. If there's a leveling off or increase in lumber price in September, it's DIY projects. It means the weather is good and people are still doing things like that.
Right.
By US Thanksgiving, no more, right? So last year there was a drop in lumber price August, September, but then it went back up again, right? This year, I would not expect, I'm not saying it's going to stay as high as it is right now, but it's not going to drop significantly before like August or September. I saw some press releases over the past week or so that some of these large producers are going to be running on weekends, and they're going to be, sort of adding overtime. And so the production is trying to keep up. People were asking me, like in third quarter last year, I did not predict lumber prices to be 1,200. No.
Yeah, perfect.
Because it was
1,000, right?
It was 1,000. It was 1,000 there, and that was like unbelievable. And people were just like,
Yeah, just
"What?"
a couple weeks ago, it was like, what, 1,030 or 40, and we were just like, this is unbelievable. It can't go any higher. And then it topped out at what, 1,260 or something last week?
Yeah, last week was 1,210 for spruce 2x4s. But when people were asking me, like in third quarter last year, and I said, I think it's going to be somewhere between 600 and 800, probably closer to 600. And I say that because when the volumes come back on, right? Like what I said, would you rather sell fewer rail cars at a super high price or more? You're going to make more money if you sell more rail cars at a more moderate price.
Absolutely.
And that's what so that's what the sawmills are trying to do. If they will manage to do that before September or the end of the year, that we don't know. But we're just watching the housing activity really closely. And I mean, this data that came out on Friday, the permits are up 30%. Permits for single family. So single family building is the largest component of all building, and it uses the most wood.
Yeah.
Single family permits in the US are up 36%. I never saw that before. So a lot of those might not be built, right?
Right.
Not every permit becomes a house.
Right.
It's a lot that we don't know. And we can't really base it on last year, because last year we didn't know that last year was going to happen. Now we know that last year happened, but we don't know. Like nobody knows, right?
Let's face it. We can only look to history for so much, and we're in a completely new territory. So it's anyone's guess really what's going to happen. We all hope that prices are going to start coming back down. I hope you're right. I hope that later this fall maybe we'll start seeing prices come back down again. All I know is a lot of the folks that I'm in contact with, a lot of viewers on this channel, they've stopped. Some of them are just out of work. They're doing other things. They stopped building. They stopped making things because it's just gotten crazy, too expensive, and their customers aren't buying, and that's understandable. So let's just hope.
But it's not like blue sky, right? Like even with all of this, lumber prices can't just go up forever, because there's replacement products, and there is, people, they might delay their projects or redo their financing or whatever. What I think is going to happen is some of these facilities that closed like in 2019. 2019 was not a good year. 2018 was a good year for building and for lumber prices. 2019 was not a good year. And because it had been difficult for like 10 years, there was quite a few sawmills that closed. What I think is that they'll start back up, but not as a primary mill, not a 2x4 mill, which frankly, they shouldn't have really been in the first place, because now you're taking all the trees and just, it's almost like selling a log. Like it's not that much added value to make a 2x4.
Right.
But if you're making something like trusses, if you're making MSR, if you're making engineered wood, cross-laminated timber, LVL, LSL, for those, you can use peeler logs. It's a much lower grade of a log.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a very expensive number 2 saw log, which is the one that we lost to the pine beetle, or that we've been logging for the past 30 years, right? So there is a opportunity, and I think inevitable, that the industry will mature. Instead of selling logs or making just lumber and selling lumber, there will be more higher value products that have these applications. They can still be used in structural, but they have other applications as well for industrial buildings and this kind of thing. There's also a shift in demand. I said in one of my videos, so the largest cohort of first-time home buyer right now is millennials. Mm-hmm. The first millennials are turning 30.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
And they don't really want a house with a yard and where they have to mow the lawn. Whether they want to live in the city or outside of the city, that's a story that's changed in the past year. But they're looking more for a community where they live, go for dinner, take their bicycle. These are multifamily. This is multifamily construction, right? So it's painful right now, and we can't answer any questions right now, but 5 years from now, these changes are going to really explain society, demographics,
Sure.
and new social economic structure look more like Europe or Japan.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. The whole shift that we've seen, even just over the last year and a half or so, the dynamics of how we live our lives and how things are interacting is completely different, and it's just a new way of life. And the companies were pretty good at adapting rather quickly with the whole shutdown and the pandemic thing, and I think the rest of us at home are still trying to catch up with this new mindset, new thought of, hey, there's a new way of doing business, and things are going to be different moving forward. So, and that's just how it is. Well, hey,
it's when you're in it and it's happening and you don't understand it that it seems horrifying. But in the future, when we look back, it'll just be like a blip, right? It'll be like like I said, 6 quarters. It'll be this, oh, remember, same thing as when 2006, when the housing, right?
Yeah, horrible.
Look back at it now, but.
Right. Now we look back on it and it's like, okay, well, you know what? We survived, and we're going to survive this too. It's going to be painful for a little while. All right, Keta, I tell you what, Keta Kosman, editor of the Madison Lumber Reporter. There's going to be links in the description below, both to your website and also to your channel. I've been following Keta now for just a few weeks, and she's putting out some great information on her videos on her channel. So I encourage all of you to go over and check out her channel, subscribe, and just take a look at what she's got going on over there. If you got questions about what's going on in the lumber industry, or if you want to follow what is happening currently in the lumber industry, Keta should be your go-to source for that information. Since 1952, the company's been putting out this information. Now, and Keta, you've been with them for how many years now?
I started in 2003.
Yeah.
And the boss retired in 2008. And that's when I took over. I'm the 3rd owner.
Nice. Outstanding. All right. Well, hey, thanks again for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's been very informative. Hopefully it answers a lot of questions that a lot of viewers have, about what's going on right now. So again, appreciate your time and thanks for being here.
In a month or 2, we'll do it again.
Hey, sounds good. And then
right? Because then we'll in a month or 2.
We'll history and say, remember when we talked about haven't things changed?
Thank you so much. It's been great. And we'll chat again soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.